Okay, now I'm going to talk about social media a little bit. Now, there's this idea that social media is creating a lot of division in our society, right? And if one look at social media, and that makes perfect sense. If you look at the way people communicate on social media, people are often talking past each other, right? They're insulting each other, they're throwing around ad hominems, they're kind of condescending, very, very condescending to the person they're talking to. And there's kind of a general overall lack of empathy in conversation on social media, right? There's not a lot of constructive conversation going on. So we can look at social media and we can also look at the division we have, and we can blame social media for the division because the division is presenting itself on social media. But this doesn't mean that social media is causing the division. And what I'm going to do in this video is basically argue the opposite. I'm going to argue that social media is solving the division. I'm going to argue that social media is not the cause of the division, but it's actually kind of the cure to the division. Now, this might sound crazy, but hear me out first. Let's zoom out and just talk about communication in general. So, with communication, there's this concept of the public square. And the public square evolves over time. So right now, much of the public square is social media, right? But before all of our technology, before social media, the public square was literally a physical public square, right? You had to go into public, or maybe a restaurant, or even in your own home, you had to talk to people directly, face to face, right? This is two-way communication, right? You are talking to a person, listening to that person, and they're hopefully listening to you. You are listening to their arguments and you're challenging them, perhaps, right? You're debating. This is what we call meaningful conversation, when two people are actually listening to each other and responding in a constructive manner, right? That's something that wasn't present, that we often don't believe is present in today's social media. But in that public square, it's almost unavoidable, right? You can't hide behind your keyboard, right? If you insult your opposition, you might get punched in the face, and then that's kind of a consequence that we have freed ourselves from with social media. But let's fast forward a little bit and introduce the printing press. Okay, so what the printing press does is it introduces one-way communication to the public square. All of a sudden, whoever owns the printing press or whoever's writing for the printing press, they write their piece and people read it. But the readers can't readily challenge the writer. They can't challenge the printing press very easily, right? Because, well, they're reading it, right? The person who wrote it might be across the country. What this does is it enables the owner of the printing press to effectively brainwash people. Maybe that writer first he writes the event, he writes the factual about the factual event, and then they throw a little bit of a subjective narrative on top of it. And this is what enables manipulation. It enables whoever owns that printing press to manipulate what people believe and what people think, right? That printing press is now telling people what to think. They're telling people what to believe rather than how to think, okay? And you learn how to think by conversing with people directly in that public square, right? But the minute you kind of remove that two-way communication with this printing press, you enable manipulation, right? You enable the owners of the printing press to control the narrative, to control people's perception, in effect. Now, I don't think this is really how the printing press was used, because I think the printing press was, I don't think people had imagined to manipulate people in that manner yet. I think the printing press was largely used to share information in an honest manner. I think people shared inventions, perhaps, or information. And in general, the printing press was used to improve humanity, right? Now, let's fast forward to the 20th century, and we invented radio and television. This is where the one-way communication was greatly diminished, or rather, the two-way communication was greatly diminished for one-way communication, or because of one-way communication. Every second that people spent watching TV and watching mainstream media and listening to radio hosts was 1 second less that they spent talking to each other. It was 1 second less that they were practicing how to think, and it was 1 second more that they were being told what to think and what to believe. This is when the manipulation and the propaganda went through the roof, right? It was like a rocket that just took off. And with that manipulation, well, you have profit motives develop. All of a sudden, you have a Democrat and Republican Party who, well, were perhaps previously different and were perhaps previously had different values. All of a sudden, the Democrat and Republican Party are attaching themselves to opposite sides of cultural divides, race divides, gender divides, religious divides, anti-vax, pro-vax divides, pro-life versus pro-choice, right? There's a kind of a cookie cutter definition of the Democrats and the Republicans. And, well, what does that do? Well, it creates a lot of division, right? Everyone who identifies as a Democrat is listening to the left-wing media, and everyone who identifies as a Republican is listening to the right-wing media. And all of a sudden, they attach themselves to the party's beliefs, and before long, you have basically the development of a media-state corporate merger. And to describe what that is in detail, the media that you watch, they profit from ad revenue, right? Who pays them that ad revenue? Who buys the ad space? The corporations, regular corporations, not media corporations, but the corporations that sell regular goods and services. They advertise on the mainstream media corporation, on the mainstream media channels, right? So, what are the mainstream media corporations going to do? Well, they're going to prop up candidates who will go into office and elect, well, rather, and write economic policy that benefits the profits of the corporations. Because again, the corporations are the ones buying their ad space. So the corporations, they fund the media corporations. So logically, the media corporations will support candidates who support economic policy that supports the corporations who are buying their ad space. Okay, it makes perfect sense. This is what capitalism does. Capitalism will create a media state corporate merger. And in the process of doing that, they will divide the public along cultural divides in order to radicalize people and get them to blame each other for all of those cultural issues. In reality, those cultural issues are caused by the economic woes, right? If the poor communities, the poor black communities are committing crimes, you want to blame the fact that they're black, but in reality, they're just poor, so they're committing more crimes, because crime is a function of poverty, it's not a function of race. But that's all kind of beside the point. The bottom line here, though, is that the one-way communication basically brainwashed people into cultural divides. People now blame the opposite side of the cultural divide, and what does that do? Well, it radicalizes people. And in effect, what happened as radio and television became more popular over the last like 50 to 70 years, people were effectively, the Overton window expanded in both directions, okay? And, well, there's no two-way communication between the opposite sides of that spectrum. There's no two-way communication between Democrats and Republicans for a good portion of the end of the 20th century, from like 1950 to 2000, right? What was basically and along with that, what we did was we told people, don't discuss politics, money, or religion with your family and friends. There's that old quote, what are the three things you don't talk about with your family and friends? Politics, money, and religion. So the media is creating all this division, cultural division, and we're telling people, don't talk to the Democrats and the Republicans that you disagree with. And then what happens? Well, then here's the kicker. Then we invent social media. Social media returns the two-way communication back into the fold, right? From 1950 to 2000, roughly, we were basically listening to mainstream media. They were telling us what to think, what to believe, and then social media comes along, and all of those people that we disagreed with, they're thrown into the same chat room, right? We're all thrown onto Facebook at once. We're all thrown into Twitter at once. No, I guess it was MySpace back then. We're all thrown into all these social media platforms, YouTube and Google, all at one time. And what's the result? Well, the result is exactly what you're seeing on social media. The result is all of that division was being built up, and then it explodes the minute we're able to talk to each other. The minute we do talk to each other. We were always able to talk to each other, right? But we didn't, because we were told not to. We were told to avoid the hard conversations. And meanwhile, we were being divided along cultural divides. And the result is the explosion of these cultural divides. We blame social media for the division. Social media is the solution. Social media restored the two-way communication to the public square that was previously being dominated by radio and television, which are one-way communication, right? We were being brainwashed, and that brainwashing created division for profit motives, and then social media threw us all together at once. We should expect a clash on social media, and that's the clash we are seeing now. That's the reason we can't have constructive conversation on social media. Isn't because of social media. It's because we were so divided prior to that social media. The division did not start with social media. Now, that's not to say that social media is perfect, okay? There's still a lot of echo chambers that are on social media. Those echo chambers were previously just used to be people in their own homes listening to Fox News and CNN. Now those echo chambers are, well, they're on YouTube, they're on Reddit, they're on Facebook, right? People are still trying to avoid each other. They're still trying to avoid these hard conversations. They're still trying to not talk about religion, politics, and money with their loved ones, right? This is the most dangerous thing that we can do as a society, is stifle our free speech. There's still a lot of censorship on social media as well. Censorship is a huge problem. Okay, we argue that these corporations, these social media corporations, are private corporations, so they are allowed to censor us. But if we allow them to do that, we are only going to prolong and kind of increase the division. And all it's going to do is make it worse when those divides clash, right? We need to let this clash play out as soon as possible. We need to restore the two-way communication to its freest form as soon as possible. Otherwise, again, it's just going to make it worse. It's going to make that clash worse. So how do we remove the censorship from these social media platforms? Well, Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he tried to do it. Now, I'm not saying he did perfect. There's still some censorship on Twitter or X or whatever, but he did try to do it. And it's tough, though, because the profits of these corporations are bound to ad revenue, right? And the corporations who pay them that ad revenue, they want the censorship because the censorship benefits their profits, because they can control who you vote for and, in effect, control both parties. Again, it's that media state corporate merger I described. So how do we fix it? Well, I'm going to propose an argument that we can make. So these social media platforms they run on the internet, right? Now, the internet runs, the cables that supply us our internet run on the telephone poles that are outside our houses, right? That run along the roads. Those roads were built. The land that those roads were built on, they were paid for with U.S. tax dollars. They were paid for by U.S. citizens. So what that means is that these social media platforms they got a free ride. They got a free ride. They are profiting from our data. They're profiting from all of this ad revenue by using the infrastructure that we built, that we paid for. We need to take this to court. We need to take this to court and charge these social media companies. And in effect, I'm not saying we nationalize them necessarily, but what we do have to do is we have to ensure that there's no censorship on these social media platforms. These social media platforms are using internet infrastructure that is dependent on the road infrastructure, the physical roads that we paid for. They're stealing from us, and they're censoring us, and they're stealing our data, and they're profiting from that data. We're getting taken for a ride on this one as the average social media user, as the average American. We need to reclaim the right to free speech on these social media platforms. And This is one way we could do it. There's some other ways. We could nationalize these social media platforms. I don't really think that's the best solution, but the bottom line is that free speech is the foundation of a sane society. If you remove one-way communication, maybe it's not necessarily an infringement on the First Amendment with this radio and television that we've adopted, but it is an infringement on our sanity. It is a way to, it will inevitably create radicalization across these cultural divides when combined with the profit motives that these corporations have. So the takeaway from this video is that no matter what medium our communication takes, whether it's the physical public square, whether it's the printing press, whether it is radio and television or social media, we must protect the right to free speech in whatever medium our communication takes, now and into the future. Whatever the future holds, whatever kind of technology develops that our communication that evolves the public square, we have to protect our First Amendment rights on that technology. If we don't, we will become insane, and that's what happened. That's what's happening. The division is not. The division is equivalent to insanity, because the division represents our lack of ability to organize, and our lack of ability to organize creates chaos, and the chaos is insanity. So, again, we have to restore two-way communication. We have to encourage people to talk, to have those tough discussions. Talk to your family and friends about politics, religion, and money. Do not listen to the people who tell you not to talk about those things. They are not on your team. If you yourself are afraid to talk about those things, you yourself are contributing to the chaos that we have today, to the division. Again, social media is not perfect today, but we can make improvements, okay? I comment on YouTube a lot, and like you probably noticed that a lot of your comments get censored. They just get removed. That's why I started making YouTube videos. It's because I was sick of that happening. So I just talk in the YouTube video. They don't remove those. You have to talk. You have to speak your mind out loud. And whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's in a public square in a restaurant, whether it's in a public debate, whether you run for office and challenge the Republican Democrat status quo, you have to have these tough discussions, because if you don't, again, we're going to go insane. So I'm going to address one more argument. There's an argument, again, I think I pointed to it earlier. It's that, or rather I mentioned it. I mentioned that there are no consequences to insulting your opposition on social media. Whereas in the public square, you might get punched in the face if you insult your opposition. This isn't true at all, okay? The consequences are just a little less direct. They're a little less obvious, but rest assured those consequences come around in the form of the insanity we are witnessing now, in the form of the cultural division and the lack of organization, and the chaos that results, okay? You might not get punched in the face right away by insulting your opposition, but in the long term, the results are the same. The results are a working class who fails to vote for people, and then the right people, and then the corrupt politicians go and go and fund a military-industrial complex that sends your tax dollars to kill innocent people. When does that come and backfire on you? At what point does the violence come to your doorstep? Again, maybe you didn't get punched in the face right away, but rest assured, in the long term, it will come and bite you in the ass, okay? So, again, take away from this video, have the tough conversations. Talk to your family and your friends about religion, politics, and money. Thanks for watching.